You know the moment I mean. The morning when you wake with clarity about what must change, when the fog lifts and the path seems obvious, when resolution fills you like wine. You see your life as it could be. You determine that today, this very day, the transformation begins. And then? Then comes noon. Then comes evening. Then comes the gradual erosion of intention by the thousand small resistances of ordinary life. By nightfall, the resolution has faded. By week's end, it has vanished entirely. What seemed so clear in the morning has dissolved into the familiar murk of habit. This experience is nearly universal. You are not weak for having suffered it. You have merely attempted to storm a fortified position without siegecraft, without strategy, without understanding the nature of the enemy you face. I propose to change this. Not through exhortation, you have had quite enough of that, but through method. What you shall find in these pages is a systematic approach to the conquest of self, tested across decades of my own struggles and observations. The capacity for transformation lies within you. What has been lacking is the technique to release it. There is a thief who operates among us with such stealth that his victims never perceive the robbery until the account has been emptied and the years have fled beyond recovery. He does not strike with dramatic force, does not announce himself with violence or alarm, does not leave behind the evidence of his crime. He works instead by accumulation, by the steady, silent extraction of minutes that become hours, hours that become days. This thief is the undisciplined hour. Consider, if you will, the gambler who loses his fortune in a single evening at Monte Carlo. His catastrophe is visible, unmistakable, complete. He knows precisely what he has lost and when he lost it. The shock may destroy him, or it may reform him, but he cannot remain ignorant of his condition. Now consider the man who loses an hour each morning for 40 years. He has lost more than any gambler, for he has lost 14,600 hours, which is to say, he has lost nearly 2 full years of waking life. Yet he perceives no theft, he feels no shock, he sounds no alarm. This is the peculiar danger of cumulative waste. It produces no wound that bleeds, no crash that echoes, no disaster that compels attention. The body does not protest an hour lost as it protests a wound received. The mind does not register the absence of what was never consciously possessed. And so the theft continues, day after day, year after year, until the man arrives at the end of his journey and wonders, with genuine bewilderment, where it all went. During my early parliamentary years, I observed 2 clerks employed in the same department of the Colonial Office. Both possessed similar intellect and similar connection. Both had entered service at approximately the same age, with approximately the same prospects. The difference between them was 2.5 hours each morning. One rose at 6 o'clock, the other at 8:30. The early riser devoted his morning hours to study, to correspondence, to the systematic improvement of his mind and the cultivation of his faculties. The late riser devoted those same hours to sleep that yielded no additional rest and to a leisurely preparation that accomplished nothing. After 30 years, I had occasion to observe their respective positions. The early riser had risen to positions of considerable responsibility, had authored 3 books that commanded attention in their fields, and had acquired fluency in 2 languages he had not known in youth. The other remained precisely where he had begun, his capacities intact but unemployed, his potential preserved but unrealized, his abilities waiting perpetually for a moment of application that never arrived. The difference was not one of intelligence or education or fortune. The difference was 2.5 hours daily, multiplied by 30 years. Let us perform the arithmetic together, for this calculation is the foundation upon which all subsequent understanding must be built. 2.5 hours daily becomes 912 hours annually. Over 30 years, this accumulates to 27,375 hours. Divide this sum by the 16 waking hours of a typical day, and you arrive at 1,710 days. Divide further by 365, and the answer emerges: 4.7 years. The early riser had, in effect, lived nearly 5 years more than his contemporary. Not 5 years at the end, when faculties diminish and opportunities narrow, but 5 years distributed across his prime, available for improvement when improvement yields its greatest returns. You must grasp this arithmetic, not merely intellectually but viscerally. 1 hour daily becomes 365 hours annually, which is 15 entire days of waking life. 15 days! What might you accomplish with 15 days of concentrated effort each year? What language might you master? What skill acquire? What book write? What knowledge absorb? The answer is almost anything. The tragedy is that this time exists, is available, could be seized and employed, yet is instead dissipated in drift, squandered in activities that accomplish nothing, lost to the thief who never announces his presence. The retrospective calculation is instructive but painful. Ask yourself what you might have accomplished had you devoted 1 hour daily to any single purpose over the past decade. Had you spent 1 hour daily learning a language, you would now speak it fluently. Had you spent 1 hour daily writing, you would have produced several volumes. Had you spent 1 hour daily in physical exercise, your constitution would be transformed. The decade has passed. Those 10,000 hours have vanished. The accomplishments exist only as possibilities that were never realized. But the purpose of this calculation is not despair. The past is beyond recovery, I grant you that. What is not beyond recovery is the future. The prospective calculation offers what the retrospective denies, the opportunity to choose differently. Project your present habits forward 20 years. If you continue as you are, what accumulates? If you rise late, what atrophies? If you permit the morning hours to slip away, what possibilities close? And conversely, if you claim those hours, if you invest them systematically, what might you possess 2 decades hence that you do not possess today? This is not exhortation. This is arithmetic. The numbers do not lie, do not flatter, do not deceive. They merely report what is and what might be. 1 hour daily, compounded over 20 years, becomes 7,300 hours, which is more than 450 16-hour days, which is more than a full year of waking life. You have the power to give yourself an additional year, distributed across your most productive decades, available for any purpose you choose. The only question is whether you will exercise that power or permit the thief to continue his silent work. I propose an exercise. This very evening, before you retire, take a sheet of paper and record how you spent today's hours. Be honest, be precise. Account for every hour from rising to retiring. Do not attempt to improve, merely observe and record. Continue this practice for 1 week. At week's end, calculate the totals. Hours devoted to productive endeavor, hours consumed by necessity, hours dissipated in drift. The honest accounting will prove more motivating than any exhortation I might offer. You will discover where your time actually goes, which is rarely where you imagine it goes. But let me warn you against the first error that awaits, performing this arithmetic and then doing nothing. Knowledge without action is worse than ignorance, for it adds the burden of guilt to the burden of waste. The calculation is not an end, but a beginning, not a destination, but a departure point. The second error is despair at what has already been lost. Look backward only to motivate yourself, then look only forward. The third error is attempting immediate radical correction. That comes later. For now, understanding suffices. After this chapter, you can no longer plead ignorance of what undisciplined hours cost. The comfortable fog has lifted. The precise price is now visible. You have acquired a lens through which every hour appears differently, weighted with cumulative consequence rather than dismissed as trivial. The question that now emerges is this: why, knowing this cost, do intelligent men persist in paying it? What force holds them in patterns they recognize as destructive? That question shall occupy us in the chapter that follows. You have now performed the arithmetic. You understand what undisciplined hours cost. You perceive, with painful clarity, the compound interest of wasted time and the accumulated debt of squandered mornings. Yet understanding alone will not liberate you. Many men have understood their condition and remained imprisoned within it, have calculated their losses and continued to incur them, have seen the path forward and failed to walk it. Why? The answer lies in a truth that most men never grasp. You have built a fortress against yourself. Every habit, once established, becomes a defensive position, dug in and provisioned, capable of withstanding casual assault indefinitely. You are not, as you imagine, choosing each day whether to rise early or late, whether to exercise or remain sedentary, whether to work or drift. You made those choices long ago, and what you experience now as daily decisions are merely the mechanical repetitions of choices already fixed into structure. During my time as a young correspondent in Cuba, I observed the Spanish citadel at Havana resist for months against forces that should have overwhelmed it in days. The attacking force possessed superior numbers, superior armament, superior resolve. The defenders possessed neither exceptional courage nor exceptional skill. What they possessed was position: walls built over decades, ditches dug and deepened, provisions stored against siege, fields of fire calculated and cleared. The attackers exhausted themselves against these preparations, while the defenders merely held what they had long since constructed. So it is with your established patterns. They resist not because they are strong in themselves, but because they occupy the high ground of familiarity. They defend themselves automatically, requiring no effort, no decision, no daily recommitment. Meanwhile, your good intentions must be actively and repeatedly marshaled. Each morning you must summon the resolution to attack. Each morning the fortress merely stands. The contest is unequal from the start. Consider what happens when you attempt to change a habit through willpower alone. You rise early one morning, filled with determination. The effort is considerable for you fight against established pattern. The second morning, the effort is no less. The third morning you are tired from the struggle, and the fortress whispers its seductions. One more hour of sleep will harm nothing. You can begin again tomorrow. The effort is not worth the exhaustion. By the fourth or fifth morning you have surrendered, and the fortress stands stronger than before, for it has now repelled an attack and proven its invincibility. This is why intelligent men remain trapped in habits they despise. It is not weakness of character, but ignorance of method. They assault the fortress with courage, but without siegecraft. They attack frontally when they should encircle. They exhaust their strength against walls when they should cut supply lines. They treat the battle as a test of will when it is actually a problem of strategy. The first insight you must grasp is the illusion of daily choice. You do not decide each morning whether to rise early or late. That decision was made months or years ago and has since hardened into structure. What you experience as choosing is merely observing the execution of a choice already fixed. This understanding eliminates the self-recrimination that accompanies each morning's failure, for you begin to see that you were never fighting a fair fight. You were attacking a prepared position with untrained troops and expecting victory. The second insight is the entrenchment principle. Every repetition of a habit deepens its position. The first time you rise late, it is a choice. The 10th time, it is a preference. The 100th time, it is a fortification. This explains why habits become harder to change over time, and why early intervention is so much more effective than late reformation. The young man who establishes good habits builds his fortress on his own behalf. The older man who attempts reformation must assault a fortress that has been strengthening for decades. The third insight is the garrison effect. Established habits require no effort to maintain, only effort to change. Your bad habits defend themselves while you sleep. They require no resolution, no renewal, no daily recommitment. They simply persist, automatically, effortlessly, while your good intentions must be summoned afresh each morning. This asymmetry is the source of the fortress's strength and the reason that willpower alone so rarely prevails. But here is the insight that transforms despair into hope. Fortresses can be taken. They are not invincible. They are merely resistant to the wrong methods. The citadel at Havana eventually fell. Not to frontal assault, not to heroic charges against prepared positions, but to systematic siege, the cutting of supply lines, the establishment of counterpositions, the patient reduction of defenses over time. When you find yourself failing to do what you know you should, stop blaming weakness of will. Instead, ask, what fortification am I assaulting? What position has my opponent established? Approach the habit not as a test of character, but as a military problem requiring strategy rather than courage alone. Identify the environmental supports that provision the habit. The late night that makes early rising impossible, the kitchen stocked with temptations, the schedule that leaves no room for exercise. Begin there, cutting supply lines before mounting the main assault. The great mistake would be to interpret this teaching as counsel of despair, to conclude that if habits are fortified positions, they cannot be taken at all. They can be taken. They merely cannot be taken by the methods most people employ. The fortress metaphor is meant to redirect your effort, not to paralyze it. Another error would be to use this understanding as excuse, saying, "My habits are too entrenched to change." The entrenched position can be reduced. It merely requires correct method. You now understand what you fight against. You see why willpower alone has failed, and why it will continue to fail without strategic support. This understanding is itself a form of compassion toward yourself, the recognition that you have been fighting courageously but poorly, and that better methods exist. The question that propels you forward is this: what strategy can reduce these fortifications? If neither sudden assault nor slow erosion succeeds, what does? That question shall be answered in the chapter that follows. You have calculated the cost of undisciplined hours. You have understood why the fortress of habit resists casual assault. Now you require a strategy that succeeds where others have failed, a method that reduces the fortification without exhausting the attacker, an approach that produces permanent results through temporary effort. That strategy is the concentrated 30-day campaign. Not revolution, which exhausts itself against entrenched positions and collapses when enthusiasm wanes. Not gradual erosion, which cannot sustain effort without visible progress and abandons the siege before walls have weakened. But the systematic campaign of limited duration, the concentration of force at the decisive point for a period sufficient to achieve breakthrough, but brief enough to maintain resolve. During my wilderness years, cast out of office and treated as a figure of the past, I maintained certain practices with a rigor that surprised even those closest to me. Each morning, regardless of spirits or schedule, I wrote. Each afternoon, I painted. Each evening, I read. These were not amusements, but fortifications against despair, bulwarks against the black dog that has pursued me since youth. I had discovered through painful experience that the undisciplined day offered no refuge from melancholy, but merely removed the tools with which melancholy might be combated. What I observed during those years of exile and reflection was this: the difficulty of maintaining a practice diminished markedly after approximately 1 month of consistency. What had required resolution in the first week became routine by the fourth. What had demanded constant effort began to demand no effort at all. The habit had ceased to require my support. It had begun to support me. The besieged fortress had fallen, and in its place I had constructed a new fortification, one that defended rather than attacked my purposes. This is what I term the law of diminishing resistance. The effort required to maintain a behavior decreases with each repetition until, after sufficient repetition, the effort inverts entirely and it becomes harder to stop than to continue. This is not poetry but mechanics, observable in military training, in parliamentary procedure, in personal discipline alike. The recruit who struggles through his first week of drill performs automatically by his fourth. The member who fumbles through his maiden speech moves with practiced ease after his 30th. The 30-day threshold represents the point at which this inversion typically occurs. Behavior repeated with perfect consistency for this duration establishes itself with a tenacity requiring far less effort to maintain thereafter. The initial difficulty is not permanent but temporary, a toll paid once for permanent passage. This understanding transforms the entire enterprise of habit formation, for it reveals that the agony of the first weeks is not a forecast of perpetual struggle, but an investment yielding perpetual returns. Consider the architecture of the month itself. The first week is battle, when resistance is maximal and every morning brings renewed combat. The established pattern fights for its survival. The new behavior feels unnatural, forced, wrong. This is expected. This is the cost of progress. The man who interprets first-week difficulty as evidence of failure has misread the situation entirely. He has mistaken the normal price of change for the sign of impossible effort. The second week brings diminishing resistance, and the first rewards of persistence. The morning alarm still demands answer, but the answer comes more readily. The body has begun to adapt. The mind has begun to accept. You are no longer assaulting the fortress. You are establishing your own positions, constructing your own defenses. The third week presents a danger different from the first: complacency. Having survived the hardest phase, the mind concludes that the battle is won and relaxes vigilance. This is precisely when campaigns collapse. The soldier who survives the initial assault and then removes his helmet has made a fatal error. Remain alert. The habit is not yet established. The fortress has not yet fallen. The fourth week remains. The fourth week achieves consolidation. What required determination has become routine. What demanded effort has become automatic. The new behavior has established itself with sufficient strength to persist without constant support. The siege has succeeded. The fortress has changed hands. What was your enemy is now your ally. The concentration principle is essential to this strategy. In warfare, concentration of force at the decisive point achieves what diffused effort cannot. The general who attacks everywhere attacks nowhere effectively. The general who masses his strength at one point breaks through where others merely probe. The same applies to habit formation. 30 days of total commitment to one habit succeeds where years of partial commitment to 5 habits fail. Select a single habit for your 30-day campaign. 1, not 5. Concentration, not diffusion. Mark the calendar. This is the duration of your siege. Prepare for the 4 phases, knowing in advance that difficulty in week 1 is not failure, but the expected cost of progress. Arrange your environment to support the campaign. Inform allies of your intention, recruiting their support. Then begin, holding nothing in reserve, committing fully for this limited duration. The cardinal error is attempting too much simultaneously. One habit pursued with complete consistency establishes itself. 5 habits pursued with partial consistency establish nothing. Each partial effort weakens every other. The divided force is defeated in detail. Another mistake is treating the 30 days as an experiment to be abandoned if results do not appear immediately. Results appear after the 30 days, not during. The investment precedes the return. A third error is perfectionism, demanding flawless execution rather than consistent effort. The habit imperfectly practiced still establishes itself. The habit deferred for perfect conditions never begins at all. You are not seeking excellence in week 1. You are seeking completion. A shortened exercise is superior to no exercise. A page written badly is superior to no page at all. Show up. Complete your minimum. That is sufficient for the foundation you are building. You now possess a strategy that addresses the problems identified in previous chapters. You understand why previous attempts failed. Assault without siegecraft. You understand why this approach succeeds. Concentration of force for decisive duration. Hope replaces despair, for the path forward is now visible. But strategies require proper execution, and execution requires deeper understanding of the mechanics involved. That understanding awaits in the chapters that follow. There is a belief so widespread, so deeply embedded in the common understanding, that most men never think to question it. The belief is this, that motivation must precede action, that we must feel inspired before we work, energized before we exercise, eager before we begin. We wait for the mood to strike, for the spirit to move, for readiness to arrive. We postpone the task until we feel equal to it. And we wonder why so little is accomplished. This belief is precisely backwards. It is not merely incomplete or partially mistaken, it is inverted, reversed, standing upon its head. The truth, which I discovered through decades of practice and observed in every productive man I have known, is this. Action generates motivation as a locomotive generates steam. The man who waits to feel like writing before he writes will wait forever. The man who writes regardless of feeling will find feeling arriving within the hour. During my wilderness years, when I was cast out of office and treated as a figure of the past, I wrote not because I wished to write, but because I had determined to write. On many mornings, I felt not the slightest inclination toward the blank page. The black dog sat heavy upon my shoulders. The words seemed distant and reluctant. Every fiber of my being counseled delay. Yet I had established the practice of sitting at my desk at a fixed hour, and I honored that practice regardless of spirit. What I discovered astounded me. Within 20 minutes, sometimes less, the wish to write arrived. The act of beginning summoned the motivation that was supposed to precede it. The pen moved, the words came, the reluctance dissolved. The carriage, it turned out, could pull the horse. This was not occasional but reliable, not accidental but mechanical. The sequence that common wisdom prescribed, feeling followed by action, had reversed itself into action followed by feeling. I propose what I call the 20-minute rule. Commitment is required only for the first 20 minutes. If, after 20 minutes of genuine effort, you still wish to stop, you may stop without self-reproach. Permission granted. But in practice, motivation almost invariably arrives before the 20 minutes expire. The act of beginning creates its own momentum. Engagement produces satisfaction. Satisfaction generates desire for continuation. This rule eliminates the paralysis of waiting for motivation by requiring only a small initial commitment. You do not commit to writing for 4 hours, you commit to sitting at your desk for 20 minutes. You do not commit to a complete exercise regimen, you commit to beginning. The reduced commitment makes beginning possible. The act of beginning makes continuing probable. The momentum principle operates here with the reliability of physics. A body at rest tends to remain at rest. A body in motion tends to remain in motion. Beginning is the hard part. Continuing is far easier. The man who has written one sentence will likely write a second. The man who has exercised for 10 minutes will likely continue to 20. The man who remains in bed will likely remain in bed. Therefore, focus all your effort on beginning. Once begun, continuation will care for itself. Consider what this inversion means for your daily practice. The common approach says, I will wait until I feel motivated, and then I will act. This approach delivers you into the hands of emotion. making your accomplishments dependent upon moods you cannot control. The inverted approach says, I will act regardless of feeling, and motivation will follow. This approach restores your agency, placing the power to begin in your own hands rather than in the caprice of emotion. The professional understands this truth. The professional writer does not wait for inspiration. The professional writes regardless of inspiration. The professional soldier does not wait for courage. The professional acts regardless of fear. This is what distinguishes the professional from the amateur. Not superior feeling, but consistent action despite inferior feeling. Adopt the professional standard and you become, in that moment, professional. Rather than waiting for internal motivation, create external triggers that initiate action automatically. The desk prepared the night before, with paper arranged and pen positioned, reduces the friction of beginning. The exercise clothes laid out beside the bed transform the first decision of the morning. The book placed on the pillow ensures that reading occurs before sleep. These environmental triggers substitute for the motivation that may or may not arrive. They make action the default rather than the exception. Tomorrow morning, regardless of how you feel, begin your chosen activity at your chosen hour. Commit to 20 minutes, no more. Observe what happens to your motivation during those 20 minutes. You will discover, as I discovered, that the wish follows the act. When tempted to postpone until you feel ready, remind yourself readiness is produced by beginning, not by waiting. The professional begins. The amateur waits to feel like beginning. Choose which you shall be, then act accordingly. The error to avoid is accepting this principle intellectually while emotionally continuing to wait for motivation. Understanding is not application. You must prove this truth to yourself through experience, not merely assent to it as proposition. Another mistake is abandoning the practice when motivation does not arrive within the first 5 minutes. 20 minutes is the threshold. Patience until that threshold is essential. I commend to you an experiment. Choose one activity you have been postponing until you felt motivated to begin. Tomorrow morning, regardless of feeling, regardless of inclination, regardless of the whispers that counsel delay, begin that activity and commit to exactly 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, assess your motivation. Has it arrived? In 9 cases of 10, you will find that it has. Repeat this experiment for 3 consecutive days with the same activity. Record your observations. You will have proven to yourself, through direct experience rather than second-hand report, that action precedes and produces motivation. You are no longer hostage to your feelings. You possess a technique for generating motivation on demand rather than waiting for it to arrive by accident. This is a fundamental shift in power, from passive to active, from waiting to creating, from hoping to commanding. The man who understands this principle holds his productivity in his own hands. He does not pray for inspiration. He manufactures it. But willpower, even when properly directed, is a finite resource. How to conserve this precious fuel for the moments when it matters most shall occupy us in the chapter that follows. Willpower is not a character trait. It is a resource, as finite as coal in a bunker, as depletable as water in a canteen, as measurable as pounds in a treasury. This understanding transforms the entire enterprise of self-discipline, for it reveals that failure is often not a failure of character, but a failure of resource management. The man who berates himself for evening weakness has likely exhausted his reserves through morning expenditure. I observed this principle at Sandhurst and later during my service in India, watching how drill sergeants managed the energy of recruits. The skilled sergeant did not permit men to waste their strength on matters of no consequence. Uniforms were standardized so that no decision was required in dressing. Meals were fixed so that no deliberation attended eating. Routines were established so that no thought was demanded for ordinary activities. Every unnecessary choice was eliminated. The purpose was evident. When the moment came requiring genuine exertion, the men possessed reserves. The soldier who has debated all morning what to wear and what to eat arrives at the battlefield already exhausted, his willpower depleted before the enemy is engaged. The disciplined regiment arrives fresh, its resources intact, its capacity for effort undiminished. The same principle applies to civilian life, though few civilians recognize it. Every exercise of willpower, however small, draws from the same finite reserve. Resisting the biscuit at tea, forcing yourself to answer tedious correspondence, compelling yourself to work when you would rather rest, maintaining civility in trying company, all drain the same account. The drains may seem trivial, but they accumulate. By evening, the account may be empty, and the important task you had planned finds you without resources to accomplish it. This is the depletion principle, and it explains much that would otherwise remain mysterious. Why does the man with excellent morning intentions find himself capitulating by nightfall? Because he has spent his reserves on trivialities. Why does the woman who resists temptation all day succumb in the final hour? Because resistance is expensive, and she has been paying all day. Why do the most disciplined people often have the most rigid routines? Because routines conserve what flexibility exhausts. The morning advantage follows directly from this understanding. Willpower is highest upon waking, having been replenished by sleep. The morning mind possesses resources that the evening mind has expended. Therefore, the most important and demanding tasks should be scheduled for morning, when fuel is plentiful. The evening should be reserved for activities requiring less exertion, less resistance, less decision. If you have been scheduling your most difficult work for evening, wondering why consistency proves impossible, you have discovered your error. You have been attempting to run your most demanding operations on an empty tank. The genius who works brilliantly at midnight is rare. Most of us require morning resources for morning quality work. The automation strategy conserves willpower by eliminating unnecessary decisions. Decisions are expensive. Each choice, however minor, extracts its toll. The fewer decisions required in your day, the more willpower remains for important work. Standardize what can be standardized. Fix your morning routine so that it requires no thought. Establish your meal pattern so that no deliberation attends eating. Determine your clothing in advance so that dressing demands no decision. This is not rigidity for its own sake. It is economy, the conservation of a precious resource for its highest use. The executive who wears the same style of suit each day has not surrendered his freedom. He has purchased the freedom to decide more important matters. The writer who works at the same hour in the same chair has not become a slave to routine. She has liberated herself from the daily decision of when and where to work. Conduct what I call the elimination audit. Review your typical day and identify where willpower is being wasted on trivialities. Every temptation you must resist, every decision you must make, every distraction you must overcome consumes fuel. Remove what can be removed. Restructure what cannot be removed. The biscuits not bought need never be resisted. The distraction eliminated need never be overcome. The decision automated need never be made. The conservation sequence follows from these principles. Expend willpower in descending order of importance. Do the hardest thing first, when reserves are full. The less important can be accomplished on fumes. The essential requires a full tank. If you must write and must also answer correspondence, write first. If you must exercise and must also attend to household matters, exercise first. The important precedes the urgent. The difficult precedes the easy. The first error is treating willpower as unlimited, continuing to make demands upon it without regard for depletion. The man who believes his reserves infinite will schedule demanding tasks for evening, maintain environments full of temptation, make dozens of unnecessary decisions, and wonder why discipline fails him. The second error is scheduling important work for evening, when reserves are lowest. The third error is maintaining environments full of temptations that require constant resistance, thereby draining willpower that could be devoted to constructive purposes. Remove temptations from your environment rather than relying on willpower to resist them. The biscuits not purchased need never be resisted. The distraction eliminated from your study need never be overcome. The decision made once, permanently, through routine, need never be made again. This is not weakness, but wisdom. The strong general does not fight unnecessary battles. He arranges his affairs so that unnecessary battles never arise. Apply the same strategy to your daily life. You now manage willpower as a strategic resource rather than treating it as infinite. You understand why you have failed in the past, depleted reserves, and how to succeed in the future. Conservation and intelligent allocation. Self-discipline becomes a matter of engineering, not heroism. The disciplined life is not the life of perpetual struggle against oneself. It is the life arranged so that struggle becomes unnecessary. But which habits should command these precious resources? Not all improvements are equal. Some unlock others, some stand alone. Which ones serve as keystones to the entire arch? That question shall occupy us in the chapter that follows. There exists in architecture a principle known to every mason and builder since men first learned to raise stone upon stone. The keystone, that wedge-shaped block placed at the crown of an arch, bears no weight itself, yet makes all other stones capable of bearing weight. Remove it, and the entire structure collapses. Place it correctly, and forces that would otherwise tear the arch asunder become the very forces that hold it firm. So it is with the edifice of personal discipline. Certain habits, strategically chosen, create conditions favorable to all other improvements. These keystone habits unlock doors that remain closed regardless of effort applied directly. The man who cannot identify them wastes his strength upon secondary matters whilst the foundation crumbles beneath his feet. I knew a man of considerable ambition during my years in Parliament, a fellow possessed of genuine intellect and no small measure of determination. He wished to write, for he had thoughts worth preserving. He wished to exercise, for his constitution had grown soft. He wished to master a foreign language, for his duties required it. And he wished to improve his knowledge of the law, for advancement depended upon such knowledge. 4 worthy objectives, each demanding perhaps 1 hour daily. Yet observe what happened when he attempted all 4 simultaneously. He achieved none of them. Not one. His mornings began with good intentions scattered across too many fronts. He would exercise briefly, then abandon the effort to answer correspondence. He would begin his language study, then remember the legal reading left undone. He would sit to write, then recall that exercise had been neglected. Each day became a battlefield of competing claims, and upon such battlefields the attacking force invariably exhausts itself whilst the entrenched positions of old habit hold firm. After 6 months of this diffused struggle, he had advanced not 1 inch upon any front. Then he did something that strikes many as counterintuitive, but which I recognized immediately as strategically sound. He abandoned 3 of his 4 objectives entirely. He focused solely upon rising 2 hours earlier than had been his custom. That single change, once established over the course of 30 days, created the temporal space for all 4 improvements without further heroics. The keystone, once in place, bore the weight of the entire arch. Without it, the individual stones had collapsed. With it, they stood firm and have stood firm to this day. The principle at work here deserves careful examination, for it determines whether your efforts shall compound into transformation or dissipate into frustration. Ask yourself of each habit you contemplate establishing, does this make other improvements easier or harder? The keystone habit makes others easier. The isolated habit affects only itself. This is what I call the cascade test, and every man contemplating reformation should apply it rigorously before selecting his first campaign. Consider the habit of early rising, which for most men constitutes the supreme keystone. Why should this be so? Because early rising creates the raw material from which all other improvements are fashioned: time. The man who rises at 8:30 has already lost the morning to others before he has begun to claim it for himself. The man who rises at 6 possesses 2 hours that belong to him alone, hours when the world has not yet begun its assault upon his attention, hours of silence and concentration such as the later day shall never provide. In those hours, exercise becomes possible without sacrificing work. Reading becomes possible without sacrificing sleep. Writing becomes possible without sacrificing family. The early riser does not require heroic willpower to accomplish what the late riser cannot accomplish at all. There is another habit that frequently functions as keystone, though it appears at first paradoxical. Regular, vigorous exercise, though demanding in itself, typically creates more energy than it consumes. The man who exercises finds his sleep improved, his mood elevated, his concentration sharpened. These improvements support every other endeavor he might undertake. The man who neglects exercise in order to preserve time for other activities discovers that the time preserved yields diminishing returns, for his depleted body cannot sustain the efforts his ambitions require. How then shall you identify your own keystone? The method is systematic and admits of no shortcuts. List the habits you most wish to establish. For each, ask this question: if I establish this habit, which other improvements become easier? Then ask its inverse: if I fail to establish this habit, which improvements become impossible? The habit that most frequently appears as enabler of others is your keystone. It may not be the habit you most desire, it may not be the habit that seems most attractive, but it is the habit that must come first. I must warn you against a common error that has defeated many a well-intentioned campaign. Men select habits according to desire rather than strategy. They pursue the improvement they most want rather than the improvement that enables all others. This is as foolish as an army commander who attacks his preferred objective whilst leaving his supply lines unprotected. You may most wish to write, but if you cannot find time to write because you rise too late, then writing should not be your first campaign. You may most wish to read, but if you cannot concentrate upon reading because your constitution is depleted, then exercise must precede reading in your sequence of campaigns. There is yet another dimension to this principle that bears examination. Some habits conflict with one another, and these conflicts must be identified and resolved before any campaign begins. Late nights conflict with early mornings. This is so obvious as to require no elaboration. But subtler conflicts abound. Heavy evening meals conflict with energetic mornings. Irregular schedules conflict with consistent practice. Social obligations that extend past midnight conflict with protected morning hours. The man who would establish one habit whilst maintaining conditions that undermine it attempts the impossible. Your task, therefore, is threefold. First, identify all the habits you wish eventually to possess. Second, analyze each according to the cascade test, determining which enable others. Third, identify conflicts between your proposed habits and resolve them in favor of the keystone. Only then are you prepared to begin your first 30-day campaign with the confidence that your effort is properly directed. Let me prescribe the exercise that shall clarify your thinking. Take 1 hour, no less, and approach this task with the seriousness it deserves. List 5 habits you most wish to establish. For each, answer these questions. If I establish this habit, which others become easier? If I fail to establish this habit, which become impossible? Record your answers honestly. The habit that most frequently appears as the enabler of others is your keystone, and that keystone must be your first campaign regardless of your preferences. The transformation this principle produces is both immediate and profound. You cease to approach habit formation as a matter of preference and begin to approach it as a matter of strategy. You ask not which habit you want, but which habit unlocks the others. This shift in perspective dramatically increases the probability of success, for your effort is now directed toward the decisive point rather than scattered across secondary objectives. The commander who concentrates his forces at the point where victory produces the greatest consequences wins battles that diffused effort loses. So it is with the conquest of self. Part 2 has now equipped you with foundational techniques, the understanding that action precedes motivation, that willpower is a finite resource requiring conservation, and that strategic selection of the keystone habit determines whether your campaign succeeds or fails. These are the architectural principles upon which successful reformation is built. But principles, however sound, require application. The time for theory has passed. Now comes the actual campaign. Part 3 shall guide you through the 30 days of battle, week by week, obstacle by obstacle, until the habits that now require heroic effort become the habits that require no effort at all. Now we arrive at the moment of engagement. The reconnaissance is complete, the strategy determined, the forces marshaled. What remains is the actual assault upon the fortified positions of established habit. And I must tell you plainly what awaits. Days 1 through 7 shall be the hardest you shall face. The difficulty is not failure, it is the expected and necessary cost of progress. The man who knows what to expect is not dismayed when it arrives. During the march to Omdurman in the Sudan, I observed a phenomenon that has remained with me across all the intervening years. The hardest days were invariably the first days, before the army had settled into the rhythm of movement. Men who had never marched such distances suffered acutely in those initial stages. Their feet blistered terribly. Their spirits flagged with each passing mile. Their bodies protested every step as though each were a personal affront. Officers spent more time encouraging stragglers than planning operations. The column moved in fits and starts, its cohesion constantly threatened by individual failures of endurance. Yet by the 7th day, those same men marched with competence. Their bodies had adapted to demands that had seemed impossible. Their minds had accepted what their bodies could not escape. The difficulty of day 1 did not predict the difficulty of day 7. The pattern that seemed impossible on Monday had become tolerable by Sunday. What had changed? Not the distance to be covered, not the heat of the desert sun, not the weight of kit and weapon. The men themselves had changed through the very act of persisting. So it shall be with you. Understand this clearly. Difficulty in the first week is diagnostic of attempt, not predictive of failure. If the first week were easy, you would not be changing anything significant. The resistance you feel is the resistance of established patterns defending themselves. Your habits have occupied their positions for months or years. They do not surrender to the first assault. They make you pay for every inch of ground. You will be tired, this is certain. You spend the capital of attention on activities not yet automatic. Every morning, rising at your new hour requires a decision that your old hour did not require. Every action of your new routine demands conscious direction that your old routine performed without thought. This expenditure of attention is exhausting in a way that established habits never are. But the exhaustion is temporary. What costs you effort today shall cost you nothing in 30 days. You will be irritable. The creature of habit within you protests its dethronement with every weapon at its disposal. Mood disturbances are among its favorite tactics. You may find yourself short-tempered with family, impatient with colleagues, dissatisfied with circumstances that would normally not trouble you. This is not your character deteriorating. It is your old patterns fighting for survival. Recognize it for what it is and refuse to be manipulated by it. You will be tempted hourly to return to comfortable patterns. The voice of habit speaks with the tongue of reason. It suggests that tomorrow would be a better day to begin. It argues that circumstances today are unfavorable. It proposes compromise, perhaps half the new routine, blended with half the old. These suggestions sound reasonable. They are not. They are the negotiating tactics of a fortress under siege, seeking terms that preserve its essential position. I must introduce to you what I call the minimum viable compliance. In the first week, do not strive for excellence, strive for completion. A half-hearted morning exercise establishes the pattern. A perfect exercise that never happens establishes nothing. Your objective is not to perform brilliantly, but to show up consistently. Brilliant performance comes later, after the habit is established. Now, in these first crucial days, mere presence is victory. The body adapts. I have seen this in military training, in parliamentary endurance, and in my own struggles against what I have called the black dog of depression. What seems impossible on day 1 becomes merely difficult on day 4 and approaches tolerable by day 7. The mechanism of adaptation is not fully understood, but its reality is beyond dispute. Trust it. Your present suffering is not your permanent condition. Environmental support matters most in the first week, when willpower is most taxed by novelty. Remove temptations before they require resistance. Prepare equipment before it requires searching. Enlist allies before their encouragement becomes necessary. Do not fight on multiple fronts when one front is already testing your reserves. The first week is no time for additional challenges voluntarily assumed. You may miss a day. I say this not to excuse failure, but to prepare you for possibility. If you miss a day, the response is immediate resumption, not despair. One battle lost does not lose the campaign unless you permit it to. The soldier who retreats from one position and immediately attacks another remains in the fight. The soldier who retreats and concludes that all is lost removes himself from the field. If you stumble, stand. If you fall, rise. The campaign continues until you abandon it. Before day 1 arrives, complete this preparation. Identify and remove environmental obstacles that will test your willpower unnecessarily. Prepare all necessary equipment and materials so that beginning requires no searching. Inform at least one ally of your campaign and its duration so that you are not alone in your struggle. Establish your minimum viable standard for week 1, the irreducible action that counts as success even on your worst day. Create your recovery protocol in advance, the response you will execute if you miss a day, so that when the moment comes you need not deliberate. The great mistake is to interpret first-week difficulty as evidence that the habit is wrong for you. It is not wrong, it is new. Another mistake, equally fatal, is attempting excellence when consistency is the proper goal. A third error is failing to prepare the environment, relying entirely on willpower when willpower is already overtaxed. A fourth is suffering in isolation, when allies could provide support that costs nothing and provides much. You approach this first week now with realistic expectations and proper preparation. You know difficulty is coming, and you know it is temporary. This knowledge itself reduces the difficulty, for the anticipated blow is always less devastating than the surprise. The soldier who knows the enemy will attack at dawn prepares his defenses. The soldier caught unawares is routed before he can respond. Week 1 shall pass, you shall survive it. And when it is past, you shall find yourself upon ground that seemed impossible to reach when you began. But the campaign is not complete. Weeks 2 and 3 bring different challenges, and Chapter 8 shall prepare you to meet them. You have survived the first week. The initial shock has passed, the body has begun its adaptation, and the worst of the resistance lies behind you. Now comes a different kind of danger. In weeks 2 and 3, 2 assassins stalk your campaign, patient and subtle, where the first week's resistance was brutal and obvious. Their names are perfectionism and exception, and they have destroyed more Reformation campaigns than all the difficulties of week 1 combined. Perfectionism whispers with the voice of high standards. It suggests that imperfect execution is worthless, that you might as well abandon the effort if you cannot do it perfectly. It points to the morning when you rose 15 minutes later than intended and declares the entire day forfeit. It observes that your exercise was brief and pronounces it meaningless. It notes that your reading was interrupted and concludes that such reading does not count. These judgments sound rigorous. They are lethal. Exception whispers with the voice of reason. It observes that today is special, that circumstances are unusual, that the ordinary rules cannot possibly apply. A family obligation has arisen. Surely the habit can be suspended. Travel has disrupted the schedule. Certainly flexibility is appropriate. A professional demand has emerged. Obviously, priorities must be adjusted. Each argument sounds plausible. Each is a lie. I knew a historian who produced 40 volumes whilst serving simultaneously in Parliament, raising a family and maintaining correspondence that would exhaust most men merely to read. When I asked him how such productivity was possible given the endless interruptions of public life, his answer surprised me with its simplicity. He replied that he had never, in 40 years of writing, permitted a day to pass without adding something to his work. Not a single day. The days varied enormously. On days when circumstances permitted sustained effort, he wrote for hours. On days when illness confined him to his bed, he wrote in bed, propped against pillows. On days of family crisis, travel, or political emergency, he found his 20 minutes. Perfection he never achieved, consistency he never abandoned. The 40 volumes were the result. The principle here is vital. Perfectionism disguises itself as high standards, but functions as self-sabotage. By insisting that execution must be perfect or not at all, it ensures that execution is not at all. The imperfect habit practiced consistently defeats the perfect habit never started. You must establish what I call your minimum viable practice, a version of your habit so modest that it can be accomplished even in the worst circumstances. 10 minutes of exercise when 60 are impossible. 1 page written when 10 would be ideal. A quarter hour of reading when an hour has vanished to obligation. This minimum is your insurance against perfectionism. When the voice whispers that today's effort is inadequate, you respond, I completed my minimum. That is enough. The minimum establishes the pattern. The pattern, once established, can be expanded. But the pattern abandoned to perfectionism must be begun again from nothing. Exception is equally dangerous and perhaps more seductive. Every day can be made to seem exceptional if you search for reasons. Travel, illness, social obligation, professional demand, family crisis, celebration, mourning. The mind is infinitely creative in discovering circumstances that justify departure from routine. Each exception seems reasonable in isolation, but exceptions compound. One exception creates precedent for the next. Before long, the exception has become the rule, and the rule has become the exception. The response is simple and admits of no negotiation. There are no exceptions until day 31. The habit that cannot survive interruption is not yet established. You are building a fortification that must withstand assault. If it cannot withstand the assault of ordinary circumstance, it will certainly collapse when extraordinary circumstance arrives. The 30 days are your proving ground. After 30 days, modification becomes possible. During the 30 days, consistency is absolute. Week 3 brings a particular danger that deserves special warning. Having survived the hardest phase, having felt the resistance diminish, the mind concludes that the battle is won and relaxes its vigilance. Complacency settles in like fog upon the channel, obscuring dangers that remain. The man who has succeeded for 20 days begins to feel that success is assured. He becomes careless. He permits small lapses that seemed unthinkable in week 1. This is precisely when campaigns collapse. Remain alert until day 30. Let me prescribe the exercise that shall fortify you against these assassins. For your chosen habit, define 3 levels of execution. First, your ideal. What you would do under perfect conditions when energy is high and time abundant. Second, your standard. What you will do on typical days when conditions are neither exceptional nor impossible. Third, your minimum. What you will do when everything goes wrong, when you are ill, exhausted, overwhelmed, and besieged by obligation. Write these down. The minimum must be so modest that you cannot fail to achieve it regardless of circumstances. 10 minutes. 1 paragraph. 5 press-ups. This is your insurance policy against both perfectionism and exception. When perfectionism whispers that your effort was inadequate, consult your written standard and judge by that measure, not by impossible ideals. When exception whispers that today is special, consult your minimum and execute it regardless. The errors to avoid are these. First, defining the minimum too ambitiously. The minimum must be achievable when you are ill, exhausted, and overwhelmed. If it requires normal conditions, it is not a minimum but a standard. Second, treating complacency in week 3 as a reward for surviving week 1. The campaign is not won until day 30. Premature celebration has defeated many a confident force. Third, viewing the minimum as the norm. The minimum is insurance for bad days. Good days should see standard or ideal execution. Use your minimum when necessary, not as routine. You now possess defenses against the 2 assassins that destroy most campaigns. Perfectionism loses its power when the minimum is defined in writing and consulted when doubt arises. Exception loses its power when the rule admits no exceptions for 30 days. The middle passage can be navigated safely by the captain who knows where the shoals lie and maintains constant vigilance against them. But you do not fight alone. Chapter 9 reveals how to recruit allies and engineer your environment to support what willpower alone cannot sustain. No man succeeds in reformation alone. This is not weakness, but wisdom, not confession, but strategy. The man who attempts change in isolation, without informing or involving those around him, finds his efforts undermined by the very people who would support him if only they knew what he was attempting. His wife schedules social engagements that conflict with his new routine. His colleagues make demands upon hours he has designated for improvement. His friends extend invitations that sabotage his discipline. None intend harm, all cause it, because they operate in ignorance of what he is trying to accomplish. Beyond the recruitment of human allies lies another dimension equally important: the engineering of physical environment. The world you inhabit each day either supports your campaign or sabotages it. The man who keeps biscuits in his pantry whilst attempting to moderate his consumption fights a daily battle the man with an empty pantry never faces. The man whose exercise clothes are buried in a distant wardrobe confronts an obstacle the man whose kit lies ready each evening never encounters. These seem like small matters. They are not small. They are the friction that determines whether campaigns succeed or founder. At Chartwell, my country home in Kent, I arranged my painting supplies in such fashion that beginning to paint required no decision, no search, no preparation of any kind. The easel stood ready in the studio. The paints were arranged in their customary order. The canvas waited upon its perch. This environmental preparation reduced the resistance to beginning, which is always the hardest part of any creative endeavor. I did not rely upon mood or motivation to propel me toward the canvas. The canvas was already there, already prepared, already waiting. Beginning required nothing more than stepping into the room. Similarly, I informed my household of my working hours so that interruption during those hours became impossible. The servants knew not to disturb unless the house were burning. My wife, God rest her soul, understood that the morning belonged to my pen. Visitors were received only in the afternoon. The telephone was not answered until a designated hour. These arrangements were not rudeness, but necessity. The environment supported what willpower alone could not sustain. Let us examine systematically how allies and environment can be marshaled to your cause. First, the recruitment of allies. Inform at least one person of your campaign and its duration. This is not boasting, but strategy of the highest order. The man whose family expects him at breakfast early rises earlier than the man whose rising matters to no one. Public commitment strengthens private resolve. When you have told another person what you intend to accomplish, you have created an external standard against which your actions will be measured. But mere information is insufficient. Arrange to report your progress to your ally at regular intervals. The knowledge that you must account for your actions reinforces the intention to act. A weekly report, however brief, creates a rhythm of accountability that operates independent of your fluctuating motivation. On days when internal resolve weakens, external accountability remains firm. Choose your ally wisely. You require someone who will hold you accountable honestly, not someone who will excuse your failures from misplaced kindness. The friend who says, "You tried your best, never mind," when you have not in fact tried your best is worse than no friend at all in this context. You need the colleague who will ask, with genuine expectation of an honest answer, whether you did what you said you would do. Now to the matter of environment. Survey your physical surroundings through the lens of your specific campaign. For each space where you spend significant time, ask, does this support or undermine what I am attempting? The book placed upon the pillow is read, the book left in another room is forgotten. The exercise clothes laid out the night before reduce friction. The exercise clothes that must be hunted in a dark wardrobe before dawn increase it. Apply what I call the friction principle systematically. Reduce friction for desired behaviors. Increase friction for undesired ones. If you wish to exercise each morning, sleep in your exercise clothes if necessary. If you wish to stop eating sweets, remove sweets from your home entirely. The temptation removed requires no willpower to resist. Every unit of willpower you can preserve through environmental engineering becomes available for challenges that cannot be engineered away. Consider also your social environment. Your companions either support your campaign or undermine it. You need not abandon friends, but you must understand which relationships pull you toward your objectives and which pull you away. For these 30 days, adjust your calendar accordingly. Increase time with those who strengthen your resolve. Decrease time with those who weaken it. This is not permanent social reorganization, but temporary tactical adjustment for the duration of your campaign. Before day 1 arrives, complete this environmental redesign. Walk through your home and workplace with your specific habit in mind. For each space, ask the question I have posed. Does this support or undermine my campaign? Make 3 changes before you begin. 3 concrete physical changes that reduce friction for desired behavior or increase friction for undesired behavior. Move the book to the pillow. Lay out the exercise clothes. Remove the biscuits from the pantry. These changes seem small. They are not small. They are the fortifications that will hold when willpower wavers. Additionally, identify and recruit your accountability ally. Explain what you are attempting and for how long. Arrange your reporting schedule. Confirm their willingness to hold you to honest account. This requires one conversation, perhaps 30 minutes. It creates 30 days of external support. The errors to avoid are these. First, relying entirely on internal resolve whilst leaving environment unchanged, as though willpower were unlimited and external support unnecessary. Willpower is limited. External support extends it. Second, choosing an ally who will not hold you accountable, who is too kind or too indifferent to report honestly on your progress. Third, underestimating the power of small environmental changes. The book on the pillow seems trivial. It makes the difference between reading and not reading. Do not despise small adjustments. They compound into large results. You no longer fight alone against indifferent or hostile world. You have recruited allies who know your objective and will hold you accountable. You have restructured your environment to support your intention at every turn. The campaign now has reinforcements that operate while you sleep, while your attention is elsewhere, while your motivation fluctuates. Part 3 has guided you through the 30 days of battle. Part 4 shall now reveal how individual habits combine into a coherent system, producing results that exceed the sum of their parts. We come now to the presentation of the complete system. What I shall set before you is not a collection of isolated improvements, but an integrated architecture of daily living. The reader who attempts to select favorites, pursuing some habits whilst neglecting others, will achieve less than the reader who undertakes all 10, even imperfectly. For these habits support one another as the stones of an arch support one another. Remove any, and the structure weakens. Maintain all, and each becomes stronger than it could be alone. I shall describe my own daily routine during the years of my greatest productivity, not from vanity but from intimate knowledge of how these elements interlock. No man can speak with authority of a system he has not himself employed. I have employed this system through decades of political struggle, literary production, and personal trial. What I offer you is tested by experience, not assembled from theory. The morning hours were sacred to writing. I would work from my bed initially, propped against pillows, papers spread across the coverlet, secretary seated nearby to take dictation. No visitor was received, no telephone answered, no correspondence attended, until the morning's writing was complete. These protected hours produced the bulk of my literary output. The exercise of later morning gave energy for the writing. The evening planning gave direction to it. Each element supported every other. Late morning brought exercise and fresh air, a walk across the grounds at Chartwell, bricklaying in the garden, or swimming in the pool during warmer months. The body cannot be neglected without penalty to the mind. I observed throughout my career that physical vigor and mental acuity rose and fell together. The statesman who neglects his constitution soon finds his judgment deteriorating alongside his health. Afternoon admitted the demands of correspondence and consultation. Letters arrived in quantities that would overwhelm most men. I developed systems for managing this flood, secretaries who sorted by urgency, standard responses for common inquiries, dictation rather than handwriting to increase speed. The unanswered letter weighs upon the conscience. The answered letter disappears. Attend to correspondence daily, and you are never buried. Neglect it, and you drown. Evening permitted reflection, reading, and the planning of tomorrow. A whiskey and soda, conversation with family or guests, examination of the day's events, and preparation for the day to come. The man who ends each evening having planned the next morning never begins uncertain of direction. He rises knowing precisely what the first hours require. Remove any element, and the system weakened. Without the morning writing, purpose drained from the day. Without the exercise, energy failed. Without the evening planning, mornings began in confusion. The habits formed a web of mutual reinforcement, each supporting all and all supporting each. Let me now enumerate the 10 habits that constitute this complete system. First, mastery of the morning hour. How one begins determines how one proceeds. The morning belongs to you before it belongs to your obligations. Claim it. Second, regular, vigorous exercise. The body is not merely the vessel of the mind, but its foundation. Neglect the constitution, and mental powers deteriorate regardless of cultivation. Third, systematic reading. The mind requires nourishment as surely as the body. 30 minutes daily accumulates into mastery over years. Fourth, disciplined correspondence. The unanswered letter festers whilst the answered letter vanishes. Attend to your obligations daily, and they never accumulate into mountains. Fifth, protected hours for concentrated work. The important tasks require uninterrupted time. Guard such time as a miser guards gold. Sixth, temperate consumption. Excess in eating or drinking undermines every other discipline. Moderation supports all else. Intemperance sabotages all else. Seventh, evening rituals for restorative sleep. Sleep restores what the day depletes. Prepare for sleep as carefully as you prepare for work, for the quality of your rest determines the quality of your waking hours. Eighth, cultivation of improving companionship. We become like those with whom we associate. Choose companions who elevate rather than degrade. Ninth, daily reflection and examination. The unexamined day is repeated without improvement. Brief reflection extracts learning from experience that would otherwise pass unutilized. 10th, evening planning for the morrow. The man who ends each day by preparing for the next never begins uncertain of direction. Do not attempt all 10 simultaneously. This warning I have given before and give again with emphasis. Begin with your keystone, typically early rising, and establish it over 30 days with the concentration we have discussed. Then add the next habit in strategic sequence. Each campaign builds upon those preceding. The full system may require 6 months or a year to establish completely. Patience in construction produces permanence in possession. The man who rushes builds poorly. The man who builds carefully builds once and for all. Let me prescribe an exercise that shall clarify the architecture. For each of the 10 habits, identify which other habits it supports and which support it. Draw the connections. You will see that the habits form a web of mutual reinforcement. Early rising supports exercise by providing time. Exercise supports sleep by depleting energy. Sleep supports early rising by ensuring rest. Reading supports writing by providing material. Writing supports reflection by externalizing thought. Reflection supports planning by identifying priorities. This understanding prevents the error of selective adoption. You may dislike exercise and imagine that your system can function without it. But exercise supports energy, sleep quality, and mood, all of which support every other habit. Remove it, and you weaken everything. The same logic applies to each habit in the system. What appears optional is in fact essential to the functioning of the whole. The errors to avoid are these: selecting habits according to preference rather than system, pursuing what you enjoy whilst neglecting what you need, rushing to establish all 10 simultaneously when concentration upon one, then another produces permanent results. Viewing the 10 habits as independent improvements rather than as components of an integrated whole, you now see the complete architecture. You understand both the individual elements and their interconnection. You possess a vision of the whole toward which your sequential campaigns are building. This vision shall sustain you through the months of construction ahead. But a system, however well designed, must prove itself capable of adaptation. Life does not accommodate rigid schedules. Chapter 11 shall address how the system flexes without breaking when circumstances demand variation. The system you have labored to construct is not a brittle mechanism that shatters at the first unexpected pressure. It is, or ought to be, a living structure capable of bending without breaking, of adapting its form whilst preserving its essence. The traveler, the man of irregular occupation, the parent of young children, the professional whose duties admit of no predictable schedule, each faces particular challenges that would seem to make systematic living impossible. Yet the principles remain constant, even as their application varies. This chapter teaches the vital distinction between adaptation, which modifies form whilst preserving essence, and abandonment, which uses difficulty as excuse for cessation. During the war years, when my schedule was dictated entirely by crisis and my location changed with bewildering frequency, I maintained the essential structure of my habits in modified form. The modification was often dramatic. Writing continued, though at different hours than peace would have permitted. Sometimes I dictated memoranda at 3 in the morning after the war cabinet had dispersed. Sometimes I scrawled notes between meetings in the back of a motor car. The form changed utterly. The essence persisted. Exercise continued, though in abbreviated sessions that bore little resemblance to peacetime walks across the grounds at Chartwell. The evening whiskey and moment of reflection remained, though sometimes that moment came at dawn rather than dusk. Had I permitted crisis to abolish discipline entirely, I should not have survived the strain. This is not hyperbole. The demands of wartime leadership would have crushed a man without structure, without the steadying rhythm of maintained practice. The habits themselves became anchors in the storm, points of stability amidst chaos. They preserved sanity when sanity was under constant assault. The principle at work here is what I call the essence-form distinction. Every habit has an essence, what it fundamentally accomplishes, and a form, how you typically accomplish it. When circumstances prevent the usual form, preserve the essence through alternative means. The essence of exercise is physical movement that elevates the heart and strengthens the constitution. The form may be a morning walk, an afternoon swim, or calisthenics in a hotel room. When travel eliminates the morning walk, the essence can still be preserved through different form. The essence of protected work time is uninterrupted concentration upon important tasks. The form may be morning hours at your desk or evening hours in your study. When circumstances eliminate morning availability, the essence can be preserved through evening adaptation. What cannot be permitted is the abandonment of the essence because the preferred form has become unavailable. The man who says, "I cannot exercise because I am traveling," has confused form with essence. He can exercise, he merely cannot exercise in his accustomed manner. Let me provide specific protocols for the circumstances most likely to challenge your system. First, the travel protocol. Before departure, identify how each habit will manifest in the new circumstance. The hotel room permits exercises the countryside may not. The train permits reading the office may not. Plan your adaptations before you leave, rather than improvising under the pressure of unfamiliar surroundings. Pack what you need: the book, the exercise clothes, the materials for your work. The traveler who arrives prepared maintains his system. The traveler who arrives hoping to improvise typically maintains nothing. Second, the illness protocol. Illness requires reduction, not cessation. The man confined to bed can still read, still reflect, still plan. He can dictate if he cannot write. He can review if he cannot create. Do what remains possible rather than nothing, because everything is not possible. I have worked through influenza, through the aftermath of accidents, through periods when doctors counseled complete rest. Complete rest, I found, produced complete deterioration of spirit. Reduced activity, calibrated to actual capacity, preserved both health and morale. Third, the crisis protocol. Crisis temporarily displaces routine. This must be accepted rather than resisted. But establish a return date in your mind. Until this matter resolves, I shall maintain minimums. Thereafter, I shall return to full practice. The return date prevents temporary suspension from becoming permanent abandonment. Without it, crisis extends indefinitely, for there is always another crisis waiting in the wings. With it, you preserve the intention to resume even as circumstances prevent full execution. Fourth, the recovery ritual. After any disruption, however prolonged, the first day of normal circumstances must see full resumption. Do not ease back gradually. Return completely and immediately. The gradual return extends the disruption. The immediate return restores the system. I have observed this principle operating in military units returning from deployment. The regiments that immediately resumed normal training recovered their effectiveness rapidly. Those that permitted extended transition periods struggled for months. Your task now is to prepare adaptation protocols before they become necessary. Take each of your established or planned habits and complete this matrix. In the first column, record the standard form for ordinary days. In the second, record the travel form, how the habit manifests when you are away from home. In the third, record the illness form, what remains possible when health is compromised. In the fourth, record the crisis minimum, the irreducible action that maintains the habit when all else must yield to emergency. Having this matrix prepared in advance transforms future disruptions from existential threats into planned variations. You consult your protocol rather than improvising under pressure. The disruption becomes a test of adaptation rather than an occasion for abandonment. The errors to avoid are these. First, treating adaptation as abandonment, ceasing all effort because perfect effort is impossible. The minimum preserved is infinitely more valuable than the practice abandoned. Second, failing to plan adaptations in advance, leaving yourself to improvise when willpower is most depleted and circumstances most unfamiliar. Third, extending the crisis period beyond its natural duration, using temporary difficulty as permanent excuse. Crisis ends, your system must survive to resume. You now possess protocols for every circumstance that might arise. From ordinary days through extraordinary crisis, your system has planned responses. Disruption no longer threatens the architecture, because adaptation is pre-planned, ready for deployment the moment conditions demand it. The system has proven itself not rigid but resilient, capable of the flexibility that survival requires. But habits serve purposes beyond themselves. Chapter 12 reveals how the mastery of personal discipline transforms every relationship and responsibility you bear. The mastery of personal habit extends far beyond personal benefit. This truth, once grasped, transforms the entire enterprise from self-improvement into social contribution. The reliable man, the man whose word is bond, the man who responds to correspondence and fulfills his commitments, is such not because he possesses superior moral fiber, but because his habits make reliability automatic rather than effortful. His dependability is not the product of daily heroism, it is the product of systematic practice. And this dependability ripples outward, affecting everyone whose life intersects with his own. I knew two men in Parliament during my early years, both possessed of considerable ability, whose fates diverged entirely upon the matter of reliability. The first answered every letter within 2 days, not because each letter was urgent, but because he had established the habit of clearing correspondence daily. His colleagues could depend upon him absolutely. When he made a commitment, that commitment was fulfilled. When he accepted a responsibility, that responsibility was discharged. Over the years, influence gravitated toward him as water gravitates toward low ground. The second was brilliant but unpredictable. Sometimes he responded to inquiries promptly. Sometimes letters sat unanswered for weeks. Sometimes he kept appointments punctually. Sometimes he arrived late or not at all. His speeches, when he delivered them, displayed genuine eloquence. But one never knew whether he would deliver them. His brilliance was like lightning, impressive when it struck, but impossible to depend upon. Over years, the first accumulated influence far beyond his natural gifts, because others could trust him. The second, despite superior eloquence, found himself gradually excluded from consequential matters. No one would assign him important work because no one could be certain the work would be done. Reliability, not brilliance, determined their respective fates. I watched this unfold across decades, and the lesson has never left me. The principle at work here is what I call the trust compound. Reliability, like money wisely invested, compounds over time. Each kept commitment slightly increases the trust others place in you. Each broken commitment slightly decreases it. The adjustments seem trivial in any single instance. A letter answered or not answered, an appointment kept or missed, a promise fulfilled or forgotten. But these small adjustments accumulate. After years, after decades, they produce dramatically different levels of trust. The reliable man finds doors opening. The unreliable man finds them closing. Consider now the burden that the undisciplined man places upon everyone around him. His unreliability creates work for others. They must compensate for his failures, remind him of his obligations, adjust their plans to accommodate his unpredictability. His chaos does not remain contained within his own life. It spreads to everyone who depends upon him. The secretary who must chase his overdue reports, the colleague who must cover for his absences, the family who cannot plan because his schedule is never certain. Each undisciplined man becomes a weight upon the shoulders of the disciplined people around him. There is also what I call the anxiety effect. Those who depend upon unreliable people cannot rest. They cannot plan with confidence. They must always maintain contingencies against the possibility of failure. This creates a constant low-level anxiety that poisons relationships and erodes goodwill. The wife who never knows whether her husband will fulfill his commitments lives in perpetual uncertainty. The employer who cannot trust his subordinate to complete assignments must supervise every detail. The friend who has been disappointed too often eventually stops depending upon the friendship at all. The solution lies not in moral reformation, but in systematic habit. When reliability depends upon daily choice, upon willpower summoned fresh each morning, it will eventually fail. Willpower fluctuates, circumstances vary, motivation waxes and wanes, but when reliability is encoded in habit, it succeeds automatically. The man who answers correspondence every morning at 11 never fails to answer correspondence because the action no longer requires decision. It simply happens as naturally as breathing. Think of every relationship as a garden requiring tending. Neglect the garden and it withers. Tend it regularly and it flourishes. Habits of correspondence, attention, and follow-through are the regular watering that keeps the garden alive. The man who waits until relationships feel neglected before attending to them is like the gardener who waits until plants are dying before watering. By then, recovery is difficult and sometimes impossible. Regular, habitual attention prevents the neglect that kills. Beyond what others experience, there is what you experience of yourself. The reliable man respects himself. The unreliable man cannot, for he knows his own failures intimately. Every broken promise, every missed commitment, every unanswered obligation registers in self-knowledge. The accumulation of such failures erodes self-respect as surely as it erodes the trust of others. The disciplined man, by contrast, can meet his own eyes in the glass each morning, knowing that he has done what he said he would do. What then shall you do? Establish fixed times for correspondence and commitment tracking so that nothing slips through neglect. Never let a request or invitation sit unanswered beyond 24 hours, even if the answer is simply acknowledgement of receipt. Maintain a system for recording commitments so that promises made are not promises forgotten. Underpromise rather than overpromise, for the man who delivers slightly more than expected accumulates trust geometrically, whilst the man who delivers less than promised destroys it. Let me prescribe an exercise. Review the past month with the honesty this examination requires. How many commitments did you make? How many did you fulfill completely and punctually? How many letters or inquiries remain unanswered at this moment? What promises have you permitted to slip from memory? Compile this audit without excuse or mitigation. Then establish the systems that shall prevent future lapses. A dedicated correspondence hour, a commitment log reviewed daily, a follow-up routine that ensures nothing is forgotten. The errors to avoid are these. First, viewing reliability as a personality trait rather than a set of habits. You need not become a different person. You need to establish different practices. Second, overcommitting in the generous moment, thereby making future reliability impossible. The man who promises everything delivers nothing. promise sparingly, deliver completely. Third, treating small commitments as unimportant. Small commitments are precisely where trust is built or destroyed. You now understand that personal discipline is not merely personal. It transforms every relationship, every professional engagement, every aspect of your social existence. The stakes of habit formation have expanded from self-improvement to contribution to the lives of all those connected with you. Part 4 has shown how habits integrate and extend beyond the self. Part 5 shall now ascend to ultimate significance, what this mastery means for human freedom, possibility, and the legacy you leave behind. We arrive now at matters that transcend the merely practical. The mastery of habit constitutes something more than personal improvement. It constitutes a proof of human freedom itself. The determinist who insists that we are helpless products of circumstance, that heredity and environment combine to make our futures as fixed as our pasts, cannot account for the man who has changed his patterns through deliberate effort. Such a man has demonstrated, in the laboratory of his own life, that the future is not fixed, that what we are today need not be what we are tomorrow, that the agency we claim to possess is genuine rather than illusory. I have known men who were told by every principle of scientific or philosophical determinism that their fates were fixed. Some were told that heredity had determined their capacities, that the blood of their ancestors had limited their possibilities before birth. Some were told that early circumstance had shaped them irrevocably, that the patterns established in childhood could never be escaped. Some were told that accumulated habit had become destiny, that years of practice in certain directions made change in other directions impossible. And I have watched some of these men refuse the verdict. They refused to accept that tomorrow must resemble yesterday. They refused to believe that they were prisoners without keys. Through systematic discipline of the kind this book has described, they transformed themselves in ways that theory had proclaimed impossible. The drunkard became temperate. The slothful became industrious. The chaotic became orderly. Each transformation was a small rebellion against the tyranny of supposed fate. Each was a proof, more powerful than any philosophical argument, that human beings possess genuine agency. Your own transformation, should you accomplish it, becomes your most powerful evidence of freedom. You have proven to yourself and to all who witness your progress that change is possible. This proof cannot be argued away. The philosopher who insists that free will is illusion must contend with the fact of your transformation. You were one thing, now you are another, and the difference was produced by your own sustained effort. What theory denies, your experience affirms. Consider the existential stakes of this proof. If determinism is true, then effort is pointless. Why struggle against the current if the current's destination is fixed regardless of what you do, but you have made effort and witnessed result? In the domain of personal habit, at minimum, determinism stands falsified by your experience. The implications extend far beyond the particular habits you have established. If you can change in one domain, change in other domains becomes conceivable. The prison that seemed to have no doors reveals an exit. Every philosophy that counsels resignation, that insists we are helpless before forces beyond our control, that declares improvement impossible, is refuted by the example of the man who has improved. Such philosophies are popular because they are comfortable. They excuse failure and eliminate the burden of effort. If change is impossible, then failure to change requires no justification. But your example refutes the excuse. You have changed. Therefore, change is possible. Therefore, those who do not change have made a choice, conscious or otherwise, not to change. This brings us to what I call the courage implication. If change is possible, then failure to change becomes choice rather than fate. This is a heavier burden than determinism imposes. Under determinism, you bear no responsibility for your condition. Under freedom, you bear considerable responsibility. But with this heavier burden comes greater dignity. You are not a leaf blown by winds you cannot influence. You are a being capable of direction, of intention, of willed movement against the current. Transformation affects others in ways you may never fully trace. The man who sees you change begins to wonder whether he too might change. Your freedom becomes evidence of his freedom. The wife who watches her husband transform his habits questions the inevitability of her own patterns. The colleague who observes your discipline wonders whether discipline might be possible for him as well. Your example spreads outward like ripples on still water, affecting lives you will never know you touched. I recall observing this principle at work in military units. When one man demonstrated that a feat thought impossible could be accomplished, others attempted what they had previously dismissed. The first man to cross a barrier opened the way for all who followed. He had proven possibility. His proof became permission for others to attempt. So it is with the transformation of personal habit. Your success gives permission to others who doubted whether success was achievable. What shall you do with this understanding? Document your transformation. Record where you began and where you arrive. Let the evidence accumulate in concrete form. When you doubt whether effort matters, consult your record. When others tell you that change is impossible, show them what you have done. Your practice is your proof. Your persistence is your argument. The determinist has theory. You have fact. The errors to avoid are these. First, false modesty that diminishes your achievement, attributing it to circumstance rather than effort, thereby undermining the very proof you have constructed. You changed through effort. Acknowledge this without apology. Second, grandiosity that imagines your personal transformation proves more than it does. You have proven that change is possible for you. This suggests but does not prove that change is possible for all. The balance is honest acknowledgement. I have changed through effort. This demonstrates that change is possible. Others may do likewise if they choose. You now understand your accomplishment in philosophical terms that elevate its significance. You have not merely improved your schedule or strengthened your constitution. You have demonstrated something about human nature itself. You have participated in the ancient argument between freedom and determinism, and you have added evidence to the side of freedom. This understanding elevates the enterprise from mere self-help to contribution to human knowledge. Freedom is proven through your example, but freedom carries responsibility. Chapter 14 addresses the moral dimension, what self-mastery demands of us and what it enables us to contribute. We must now address the moral dimension of self-mastery, for the enterprise carries obligations that extend beyond personal benefit. The man who cannot govern himself is, to that precise degree, a burden upon everyone who must deal with him. His unreliability creates work for others. His unpredictability breeds anxiety. His failures of discipline exact costs that spread far beyond himself, touching every life that intersects with his own. To master one's habits is therefore an act of courtesy as well as prudence, a contribution to the orderly conduct of civilized life. We owe it not merely to ourselves, but to all those whose welfare is bound up with our own. Consider the parent whose undisciplined habits teach disorder to children. Children learn not from what their parents say, but from what their parents do. The father who preaches industry whilst practicing indolence teaches indolence. The mother who counsels temperance whilst demonstrating excess teaches excess. No amount of verbal instruction can overcome the silent testimony of observed behavior. The parent who would form disciplined children must first become disciplined. There is no other path, no shortcut through exhortation, no substitute, for example. Consider the employer whose chaotic schedule creates chaos for employees. I have observed organizations rise and fall upon the discipline of their leaders. The commander who cannot organize his own affairs cannot expect organization in those he commands. The executive who misses deadlines, forgets commitments, and changes direction unpredictably creates an environment where others cannot succeed. His disorder becomes their disorder. spreading through the organization like contagion through a barracks. Consider the friend whose unreliability undermines the very foundation of friendship. Friendship rests upon mutual dependability. The friend who promises and fails to deliver, who agrees and fails to appear, who commits and fails to execute, erodes trust with each failure. Eventually, the friendship exists in name only, for its essential substance has been destroyed. The unreliable friend has not merely disappointed an individual, he has damaged the institution of friendship itself. I have seen families transformed by the reformation of a single member. When the father imposed order upon his own affairs, order spread through the household. When the mother established discipline in her own practices, discipline became possible for children who had never known it. The reformed member did not preach reformation. He embodied it. His example spoke with an eloquence that mere words could never achieve. I have seen offices renewed by the discipline of a single leader. When the executive began answering correspondence promptly, his subordinates followed. When he began keeping appointments punctually, punctuality became the standard. The leader's example created permission for others to improve, established expectation that improvement was possible, demonstrated that discipline and effectiveness went together. His personal transformation became organizational transformation. The disciplined man becomes an anchor point, a center of stability around which others can organize their own efforts. In a world of chaos and unreliability, he provides something solid to grasp. Colleagues can depend upon him. Family can trust him. Friends can rely upon him. This dependability is itself a gift to everyone in his circle, a contribution made simply by being what he is, rather than by any particular action he takes. There is a principle here that military service taught me long ago. The officer who would lead disciplined troops must himself embody discipline. Authority follows example. It cannot long survive hypocrisy. The men observe their officers constantly, noting every departure from the standards being preached. The officer who demands punctuality whilst arriving late, who demands sobriety whilst drinking to excess, who demands courage whilst displaying timidity, loses the moral authority upon which command depends. His words become hollow. His orders become suggestions. His leadership becomes pretense. The same principle applies in every context where one person influences another. The teacher who would instill discipline in students must first possess it. The mentor who would guide a protege toward excellence must first demonstrate excellence. The parent, the employer, the friend, the leader, each influences others in proportion to the example set rather than the words spoken. Beyond what others experience, there is what you know of yourself. The disciplined man respects himself. He can meet his own reflection each morning knowing that he has done what he set out to do, that his word to himself has been kept, that his intentions and his actions align. The undisciplined man cannot maintain this self-respect, for he knows his own failures with an intimacy that no external observer can match. Every morning he confronts the gap between what he intended and what he accomplished. This knowledge corrodes self-respect from within. Let me prescribe an exercise that shall clarify the moral stakes. Draw a diagram with yourself at the center. Radiating outward, identify everyone affected by your habits. Family members, colleagues, friends, subordinates, students, anyone whose life intersects regularly with yours. For each person, consider two questions. First, how does my discipline serve them? What do they gain from my reliability, my consistency, my follow-through? Second, how does my disorder burden them? What costs do they bear from my unreliability, my inconsistency, my failures of execution? This exercise transforms self-improvement from private project to social contribution. The stakes are no longer merely personal. Your discipline benefits everyone in your circle. Your disorder burdens them. When motivation wavers, remember this. When the temptation to lapse seems compelling, Consider who else will bear the cost of that lapse. You fight not for yourself alone, but for all those connected to you. The errors to avoid are these. First, using moral weight as instrument of self-torture, adding guilt to every failure rather than motivation toward success. The purpose of this understanding is inspiration, not flagellation. Second, becoming sanctimonious, imagining that self-discipline makes one morally superior to others. Discipline is contribution, not credential for condescension. Third, forgetting that others face their own struggles, that your judgment of their failures is as unwelcome as their judgment of yours. You now understand self-governance as moral duty as well as practical strategy. The significance of your effort has expanded to encompass everyone whose life touches yours. This understanding adds weight to resolve and dignity to effort. Freedom is proven. Responsibility is understood. What remains is legacy, what we leave behind when we ourselves are gone. Chapter 15 addresses the ultimate question. We arrive at last at the question of legacy. Each of us leaves behind not merely deeds accomplished and possessions accumulated, but patterns demonstrated, examples set, proofs of possibility offered to those who come after. The man who has transformed himself through disciplined habit offers to everyone who witnessed the transformation the most powerful of all testimonies, that it can be done. His example becomes a resource for others, visible across the years, an encouragement that persists long after the particulars of his life have faded from memory. I think often of the great lighthouses of the English coast. Built at tremendous expense and maintained with meticulous care, they save lives not through direct intervention, but through the simple fact of their existence. Their steady light is visible to all who navigate those dangerous waters. The ship in distress does not require the lighthouse keeper to come aboard and take the wheel. The light itself is sufficient. It shows the rocks to be avoided, the channel to be sought, the harbor that awaits beyond the present difficulty. The man who has transformed himself through systematic discipline becomes such a lighthouse. He does not need to preach transformation, he embodies it. He does not need to argue for possibility, he demonstrates it. Those navigating their own dark passages, seeing his steady light, take courage that the rocks can be avoided, that the harbor can be reached. His example speaks where words would fail. People are persuaded by example far more than by argument. The finest treatise on discipline impresses less than a single life transformed. Your transformation, visible to those who know you, speaks louder than any book could speak. They saw what you were. They see what you have become. And the difference proves what argument alone could never prove. The proof is in the living, not in the telling. Let your changes be visible to those who might benefit from witnessing them. This is not vanity, but service. The transformation hidden in private helps no one but yourself. The transformation visible to others helps all who see it. When colleagues observe your discipline, when family witnesses your reliability, when friends experience your follow-through, they receive evidence that such qualities are achievable. Your visibility gives them permission to attempt what they might otherwise have dismissed as impossible. Consider the generational reach of your example. Your children, should you have them, will carry forward the patterns you established. They will teach these patterns to their own children, who will teach them to theirs. The discipline you build today echoes through generations you will never see. The grandson who rises early because his grandfather rose early, the great-granddaughter who answers correspondence promptly because somewhere in family memory this became the standard. They benefit from your effort without ever knowing its source. But generational influence is only the beginning. People you will never meet may hear of your transformation and take courage from it. The colleague who mentions your discipline to a friend, the family member who cites your example in conversation, the acquaintance who recalls your transformation when facing his own challenge. Through these channels your example travels farther than you can trace. Your lighthouse shines for ships you will never see. In a world that often counsels resignation, your transformation is a small rebellion. Against every voice that whispers that the human condition admits of no improvement, you have improved. Against every doctrine that preaches helplessness, you have demonstrated agency. Against every philosophy that counsels despair, you have embodied hope. Your example is a counterstatement, a refutation, a testimony for the defense in the case of human possibility. In undertaking your transformation, you join a company extending across centuries. Men and women in every age have refused to accept that present circumstances must determine future possibilities. Philosophers have called them names and assigned them categories, but their essential quality is simpler. They chose to change when easier paths lay open. They added their proof to the accumulated evidence that human beings possess genuine freedom. You become part of that tradition. Your example adds to its weight. What shall you do with this understanding? Let your transformation be known to those who might benefit. When asked how you accomplished what you accomplished, answer honestly and completely. Share the methods, the struggles, the techniques, the failures that preceded success. Be generous with what you have learned, for knowledge shared is not diminished, but multiplied. The lighthouse does not shine for a single ship, but for all ships passing in the night. Consider recording your journey in whatever form suits your circumstances. A letter to a child, a conversation with a friend, a memoir for family, or simply a journal for your own future reference. Those who follow you may find in your record the encouragement they need to begin their own campaigns. The document you create today may serve purposes you cannot foresee, reaching readers you will never know. The errors to avoid are these. First, prideful preaching that transforms example into lecturing. The lighthouse does not shout at passing ships, it simply shines. Let your life speak without requiring the accompaniment of constant explanation. Second, undervaluing your contribution, imagining that your small transformation does not matter against the vastness of the world. It matters. Every proof that change is possible matters. Every lighthouse, however modest, saves ships that would otherwise founder. You now understand your accomplishment in terms of legacy. You have not merely improved your own life, you have contributed to the sum of human evidence that improvement is possible. Your light shines for others navigating their own difficulties. This understanding provides ultimate meaning to what might otherwise have seemed merely practical. The campaign you have undertaken has significance that extends beyond yourself, beyond your circle, beyond your lifetime. And so we arrive where we began, yet we see now with different eyes. The paradox that opened our inquiry resolves itself. Men attempt the difficult ascent of character without preparation because they do not understand that character admits of systematic cultivation, that the conquest of self follows laws as fixed as those governing the conquest of nations. Now you understand. The arithmetic of wasted hours has been calculated. The fortress of habit has been surveyed. The strategy of the 30-day siege has been mastered. The campaign awaits only your decision to begin. The hour of decision is always the present hour, for there is no moment better suited to commencement than the one in which you find yourself. Tomorrow offers no advantages that today lacks. Next week provides no conditions more favorable than this week. The perfect moment for beginning is a phantasm that recedes as you approach. There is only now. Tomorrow's sunrise will discover you either one day advanced upon the path of transformation or one day deeper in the patterns you seek to escape. The choice is yours and cannot be made by another. No teacher can choose for you. No book can decide in your stead. No friend can bear the weight of this determination. It is yours alone. But know this, if you choose to undertake this campaign, you do not go alone. You join the company of all who have refused to accept that accident determines destiny, that circumstance dictates character, that today's failures guarantee tomorrow's defeat. You become a living proof against despair, a demonstration of what is possible when method meets resolve. Your success shall encourage others, as the success of others has encouraged you. The methods are now in your possession. The obstacles are now understood. The pitfalls have been identified, and the means of avoiding them provided. What remains is the act of will that transforms knowledge into action, intention into execution, hope into achievement.